Step into a world of romance and mystery with Tamora Rose. Today we're reading Chapter 8 of Child of the Wind. The sun would rise early. The first day of the ancient festival of Midsummer was promising to be a fine one, and though Canace was a firm Christian, she didn't want to miss out on the earliest sunrise of the year. Her nightgown clung to her curves as she pulled on a pair of suede riding boots, tossed a strange saddlebag over her shoulder, and rose. Remembering herself, she turned back and found her delicate robe. It didn't cover much, but it was better than just her nightgown. Moving on silent feet, she slipped out of her bedchamber and down the stairs, Bentley firmly at her heels. The lambs wandered after her, blessedly silent in the soft hours of pre-dawn. The manor was quiet, the only sounds those of the servants going about their early morning duties. Since she was in her nightgown and robe, getting caught by a servant wasn't in her plans. Maneuvering through the unfamiliar manor took a little time, but she'd planned on that. After 10 minutes of darting around the manor and about a minute hiding in a pantry, she emerged onto a cobblestone walk. The night was still caught in darkness, keeping even the servants from the herb garden at this hour. She slipped through the garden without worry, even skipping a little as she drew nearer her goal. Bentley, sensing her excitement, gave a low bark. "Shh!" she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "You'll wake someone. We don't want anyone to find us." Canace scooped up both lambs, stuffed them in the saddlebag, and quickened her pace. Dawn would break soon, and she was looking forward to it. The stables were directly before her now, but she didn't go inside. Epona was a Highland horse, well used to spending her days and nights out of doors. She would be in the paddock. A few minutes later, she was climbing over the paddock fence as she let out a low whistle. The answering nicker came immediately, bringing a smile to her lips. The mare danced forward out of the darkness, more than ready for their morning ride. With no saddle or bridle, most wouldn't have attempted to ride the high-spirited mare, but Canace knew her equine friend. She and Epona had done this many times before. The mare held still as the girl put the saddlebag across her withers, then tied the straps around the mare's neck. She designed this bag to hold the young lambs as she rode, but this was the first time she was actually using it. Once the lambs were secured, she reached up, grabbed a handful of Epona's dark mane, and swung herself up onto the mare's back. She wondered briefly if Jet would be impressed. Dismissing the thought, she adjusted her robe and nightgown. Both rode up, exposing her legs to just past the knee, but she didn't care. "Bentley," she called quietly. The dog was immediately at their heels. Now the only problem left to solve was the fence. Normally, Epona would simply jump it, but the lambs were here now. Sitting back a bit, she loosened the bag and cradled it in her lap. Biting her lip, she wondered if she could do it. Ever the risk-taker, she decided to try. She spent a minute, maybe two, tucking the lambs as close to her belly as she could. When she was sure they were as safe as they were going to get, she covered them with one arm and wrapped her other hand in Epona's mane. Thus ready, she clucked 3 times and centered herself. Epona took off, racing toward the nearby fence. Canace had less than 10 seconds to brace herself, then they were flying their way to freedom. The mare's hooves came down on the grassy lawn on the other side, making the lambs bleat loudly and bringing Canace back to earth. Only the fierce grip of her thighs saved her from a dangerous tumble. She checked on her little lambs. They were there, and they were both in one piece. Though she wasn't sure she wanted to do that again, she was glad she'd tried it at least once. Shaking her head at herself, Canace slung the bag around Epona's neck once more. Once she was sure the lambs were secure, she whistled for Bentley and urged Epona into a trot. She wanted to go faster, but the drum of Epona's hooves just might wake someone, and that wouldn't do. So she curbed her impatience, holding Epona back until they were well away from the manor and all outbuildings. When she was sure they were away from the eyes and ears of the Duke and his household, she gave Epona her head. The land was unfamiliar, but it didn't matter. Because she didn't care where she was going, she slowed only briefly to take note of her surroundings. To the north was a forest, but she wasn't interested in trees. East was the road to London, but the road held no fascination for her. West was the manor, but going back made no sense. So south, then, into the wild plains she'd admired but had not had a chance to explore. Sensing her choice, Bentley took off, heading for the open plain before she had a chance to turn Epona. Urging Epona into a gallop, she took off after the shaggy dog as the horizon began to glow. She didn't know how long they flew across the landscape. When they finally stopped, the manor was no longer in sight, and she could hear the sound of rushing water. Knowing daylight would reveal the source of the sound, she slowed Epona and waited for the sun. It didn't take long. Canace closed her eyes so she could feel it on her skin and smell it on the breeze. The sun burst over the horizon, warming her flesh and drawing a sharp bark from Bentley. When Canace finally opened her eyes, it was to an explosion of color. Reds, oranges, and pinks streaked the sky, bouncing off the clouds and reflecting off the dew on the grass. The beauty of it took her breath away. When her eyes could take no more, she turned Epona away and once again noticed the sound of rushing water. Whistling for Bentley, she urged her horse forward. The dog ignored her, deciding to chase a squirrel. Canace shrugged and continued on. As the dawn lit the landscape, she noticed the yawning blackness ahead. A bluff. She dismounted, took the bag from around Epona's neck, and let the mare roam. Knowing the lambs would like to stretch their legs, she placed them on the soft grass and turned them loose as well. All her friends were safe, and she was free to wander. Except she didn't do much wandering. Instead, she walked to the bluff, sat on the plush grass, and dangled her legs over the edge. The sensation was relaxing, so she closed her eyes and gave herself over to it. A throat cleared, caused the Canace to bounce to her feet, whirl, and almost tumble off the edge of the bluff. A strong arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her back just in time. "What the hell are you trying to do?" Jets shouted. "Kill yourself? Over an arranged marriage?" With a little shriek, she broke free of him and stomped away. "Do you honestly think you're worth killing myself over? Are you really that conceited?" Startled at the heat in her voice, Jet backed up a step. What are you doing here?" "What business is it of yours?" she snapped. It was then that he finally noticed what she was wearing. "You're in your nightgown. I've got a robe on." A robe that had come undone, but he didn't say that. His eyes moved over her body, noticing the soft curves only barely concealed by the clinging fabric. Her waist was as tiny as it had been last night, proving that she didn't need a corset to appear delicate. Her hips were round and far too tempting, so he moved his gaze upward. That was a mistake, for when he raised his eyes, he couldn't help but focus on her breasts. He could tell through the fabric that they were firm and just the right size. His hand itched to touch them, and he grew instantly hard. He wanted to tug aside the nightgown and see those luscious breasts for himself. But she was a virgin, or so he'd been assured. Then again, maybe she wasn't. He'd always heard that Scottish girls were a little wild. He'd have to approach her carefully just in case she really was a virgin. But he could at least test the waters. "What are you looking at?" she asked suspiciously as she crossed both arms over her chest. Jet smiled at her. "You are quite fetching by dawn's light." The words were a little flowery for him, but he thought she might like them. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're very beautiful, especially when the sun catches your hair." With her body unbound and her hair tumbling about her, she was indeed a vision. Unsure what to do with the compliment, and a little intimidated by his tall frame, she took a step backward. He stopped immediately and held out a hand instead. "Would you sit with me?" It seemed a benign enough request, and she was supposed to marry the man, so she put her hand in his and let him lead her to the only tree to grace the bluff. At his urging, and only because she didn't want to appear a frightened child before her betrothed, she curled up at the base of the great oak. As he lowered himself beside her, she folded her legs under her body and placed her hands primly in her lap. The illusion of propriety was hard to maintain as she sat there in her nightclothes, but she did try. Jet, meanwhile, couldn't have cared less about propriety. He was more than a foot taller than she was, and his height afforded him a near-perfect view of her young breasts. When the light struck the delicate fabric of her nightgown, the cloth became almost transparent. The pink of her nipples stood out like beacons, making him lick his lips. The urge to cup her breast or run his hand up under her nightgown was strong, but she had expressed no signs of desire. Maybe she really was as innocent as she appeared. He was disappointed and exhilarated, all at once. If she was a virgin, he'd have to take this slow. He thought to relax her with conversation. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" Canace bit her lip, but decided the truth couldn't hurt. "It's the earliest dawn of the year. I like to greet it." His eyes dropped to her breasts again. "In your nightgown?" She had the grace to flush. "I hadn't meant for anyone to see me. I was going to sneak back into the manor before anyone was awake." "That might have worked," he replied, "if I didn't ride at dawn every morning." His eyes were fastened on the flush as it crept down her neck and warmed her breasts. "Even Duncan doesn't wake so early." "I enjoy an early morning ride." His cock throbbed at the double meaning behind his words. She didn't notice. "So do I, but I usually go back to bed afterwards, so I didn't bother to dress." He knew she didn't understand the implications of her words, but he still almost groaned. "No harm done?" The sun was slowly making its way into the sky. Canace glanced up, judging the time. "I suppose I should get back," she finally said. Jet didn't want that at all. "There's no rush." When a lock of hair fell over her face, he took the opportunity to tuck it behind her ear. The first time he did so, she ducked her head and flushed a little, but by the third time she was letting him caress her cheek and even run his thumb over her bottom lip. Jet shifted closer, pleased when she didn't pull away. "Have you ever been kissed?" he whispered as he took one of her hands in his. Canace shook her head. "Then we should remedy that immediately." His lips found hers as the wind picked up. A full minute passed before she responded. Her lips softened under his gentle assault, and her hand came up to rest on his shoulder. That was enough for Jet. He immediately deepened his kiss, letting his tongue dart into her mouth. Her small gasp of surprise was swallowed as he urged her tongue to engage with his. Canace couldn't think straight. Her head was swimming, her blood on fire as he tilted her back against the tree trunk. She hadn't expected to enjoy his kisses, but now she craved more of him. Unbeknownst to her, Canace was making little mewling sounds deep in her throat. Jet almost chuckled, but he didn't want to disrupt the spell they'd woven. Slowly, ever so slowly, he pulled his mouth from hers and began to kiss along her jawline. He sucked on her earlobe, causing her entire body to pulse. When his tongue traced her ear, she started to tremble. Needing a better angle, Jet curled his hands around her delicate shoulders and lowered her to the grassy earth beneath them, all without letting his lips lose contact with her sweet skin. Keeping Canace distracted with his lips, he reached for the ribbons at her neck. The cool air passing over her breast didn't disturb her, but when a large hand closed over her soft breast, she took immediate notice. "Stop!" she squealed as she tried to push him away. But he was larger and heavier than she was. She wasn't able to escape unless he allowed it. Canace changed tactics and went to slap him. Shocked, Jet released her breast and grabbed her hands. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong? You're... Get off me!" Instead of complying, Jet glanced downward. His mouth went dry. They were even lovelier than he'd imagined. Perfectly round, perfectly symmetrical, and with the rosiest tips he'd ever seen. Jet couldn't help but itch to touch them again. That brief caress hadn't been enough. Shifting so he could hold both her hands in one of his, he reached out to touch her. "No! Stop it!" Frantic now, Canace struggled, making her breast bounce for him. Jet couldn't keep the grin off his face. "Get off!" Before he could think to comply, a low growl came from behind him. He had only just turned his head when he saw a blur of motion and felt a sharp pain in his arm. "Damn it," he cursed, releasing Canace and turning on the dog. As soon as his hands left her body, Canace found her feet and ran, tying her nightgown in place as she went. The two little lambs were still milling about, so she scooped them up and whistled sharply. Epona raised her head and trotted over. Canace secured the lambs, ignoring their irritated bleats of being shoved into the bag again, and swung onto the horse's back. Only when she was safely mounted did she look back over her shoulder. "Bentley!" she called. The dog immediately released her betrothed and darted toward her. Without meeting Jet's eyes, Canace urged Epona into a gallop, heading straight back to the manor. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this chapter, stay tuned for more tales of romance. Until we meet again, may your days be filled with passion and just a touch of magic.